to MFA Writers. I'm so happy to have you here. The academic year is wrapping up this week at my school, and I'm busy with all the big and little tasks that must be finished before it is officially summer. So, we've got a re-release for you today of one of my favorite conversations from Season 3. But before we get to that, I just wanted to say congratulations to anyone listening who is finishing up their MFA this month. I hope the experience was everything you hoped it would be, and I wish you lots of happy writing days in the future. You can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. We love to hear from listeners, so feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms, or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. And if you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Also, if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, you can apply at mfawriters.com. On that same website, you can also click the support button to support us financially, if it's within your means. Or you can do so by going directly to buymeacoffee.com/mfawriters. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with DeAndre Holmes. A native of Philadelphia, DeAndre received a bachelor's degree from Temple University and is a second-year MFA candidate at Columbia College in his current home of Chicago. He's an aspiring author penning his first book of short stories titled Daddy, Do You Love Me? And a novelette titled Obscurity. DeAndre's work can be found in Short Story Break, Sunku Magazine, and Allium Literary Journal. In his free time, he enjoys reading, traveling, exploring different cultures, and binge-watching animal documentaries. Today, he's brought an excerpt from a short story to read for us.
This excerpt that I'm reading is from my short story titled Paris from Underwater. It's in the middle of the short story, so I'm just going to give a brief synopsis of what happened up until this point. Essentially, my unnamed character has traveled to Paris to see his father after 13 years of his father leaving to pursue an art career in Paris. And so he is essentially trying to understand why his father left. And that is the reason why he then traveled to Paris after all these years to see him. This excerpt I'm going to read is about his early interactions with his father when his father left for Paris, where they were connecting through letters to each other. I'm just going to start right from that point. My father and I used to keep in contact strictly through letters. He couldn't afford his phone bill, so within the first few months of him leaving, his phone was disconnected. I packed some of the letters I never mailed to give to him in person. To kill some time, I started reading over some of them. Back then, we would send 2 to 3 pages at a time. Sometimes he would send pictures of Paris and he would tell me about the new words he learned in French. And I would send him pictures of me and my mother whenever we took a trip together without him. I remembered longing for his letters once or twice a month, depending on the mail. They were constant until after high school. I would wait weeks for his reply, and then months, and then years, never to any avail. Dear Daddy, do you remember the summer me, Mama, and you drove to Georgia to visit the plantations there? You thought it important to see the places our ancestors trotted, to be immersed in their world, to fall as they fell, to be poisoned by the sun they saw. Well, our sun was smiling down on our AC-less car that day, causing it to smell like black ice and sweat. We baked in that metal insulator, miserable and distraught. Mama's face looked like it was melting into her lap, where her thighs sat tightly together, resembling chocolate bars. I was in the back seat with the seatbelt sticking and ripping through my chafed and wet skin. Sweat poured into my eyes like it was trying to drown them. You looked around at us both, Mama's exhaustion, my delirium, and suddenly made a sharp turn and pulled off into the side of the road. Mama and I gasped while holding on tightly to the door handle and the car ceiling. You pulled to an abrupt stop and jumped out of the car and prompted us to do the same. Mama tried to tell you to get back in and stop your shenanigans. I was reluctant to face the sun head on, but you insisted all the same. You stripped down to your underwear and waved your clothes around while acting and talking like some cowboy from the wild, wild, wild West. We were annoyed at first, but when a car drove by honking and said, "That's right, partner, work it," we both laughed out loud. In fact, bubbled over in laughter. We followed suit and rode the rest of the way to Georgia in nothing but our undergarments, forgetful of the heat and reminded of our teeth inside our gaping mouths. Do you remember? Mama and I never talked about that trip again after you left. I sometimes catch her whispering your name at dinner, maybe praying for you. Anyway, thank you for that trip, Daddy. I miss you. Love you. Your son. My father was, at the time, a visionary, always seeking to make us smile when we had nothing else to tease the nerves in our cheeks. I smiled a bit, wondering why I never sent this letter. This was one of the letters I was most proud to write, but then I felt embarrassment wave over me like a banner of red, white, and blue pride. This letter was meant to remind him of the days when I was a boy and he a man. I felt embarrassed because what would I do if he didn't remember? I put it aside, hoping it would burst into flames, hoping to once again forget. There's a certain attachment you have to the pen and paper as you write a letter. It becomes more intimate, more precious, more violent to you. When I was angry, my handwriting was quick and sharp with many crossed out words because my brain could not process the spelling of the words before I wrote them. When I was sad, I wrote in melancholy-like handwriting, often in cursive with precise strokes. If I cried, I always wondered if my dad could tell, if he would notice the smeared ink and knew the exact moment the tear hit the paper, or if he could smell the salt from my tears when I finished the letter with, "I miss you." I wondered if he was ever sad or angry or frustrated. I could never outrightly tell. His handwriting was the same every time. The emotions bound from a letter is, as it should be, captured and released upon you like a breeze of wind caressing your face, or like a bludgeon bat smashing into the back of your skull. I like to think that my letters were special, and I like to think that my father cherished them, but I will never know because I will never ask. Thank you.
Thank you. That was great. I really appreciate you sharing that with us, and thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Absolutely.
Well, I'm really looking forward to talking to you because I think you've got a really interesting story, and I want to give you a chance to tell it. So let's start at the beginning, if that's cool with you. You grew up in Philadelphia. What was growing up in Philly like? And were you a big reader and writer as a kid?
So growing up in Philadelphia was what you made it to be. And what I mean by that is I grew up in a very impoverished neighborhood. I didn't have much resources or access to resources in my early adolescent years. As far as being a big reader and writer, I can honestly say that I was not. I despise reading. My dad was always like, "You should pick up a book and go read if you're bored." And I was like, "No, I'd rather just be bored instead of reading." But I started finding that I enjoyed writing in eighth grade, I want to say. I had a teacher who made us write a fictional assignment. And I found that in writing that assignment, I really enjoyed writing fiction. And so that was kind of like my first introduction into writing fiction. But prior to that, I would write poetry, or what at least I thought was poetry. So I would just write a couple of different lines and, call it a poem. And people were receptive to it. People thought that it was really good. And I remember being a part of this Facebook group where I would write poetry and publish it there or post it there, and they would give me feedback and things like that. So yeah, up until 12 or 13, I would say writing wasn't really much of a facet of my life.
Mm-hmm. But after that, you started getting into it more. We all had that poetry phase, didn't we? Where we were writing that stuff in our basements that we just thought was the most profound thing that had ever been written.
It was I was very dark. It was just very, I thought poetry at the time had to be very dark and sad and angry and all these things. And so I was writing a lot of dark stuff. And I remember one time my dad found a few lines of what I wrote, and it was "Oh, I would wish death upon something, something." It's really dark. And his response was so what's going on? Like, he gave me the talk. He was like, we need to have a conversation. Like, let's make sure you're not like a serial killer or anything like that. But yeah, I just felt like, I just wanted to write something. It felt natural at the time. So yeah.
So you ended up writing a bit when you were younger, but then when you went to college, you actually got your bachelor's degree in business administration. So what made you pursue a degree in business admin? And while you were in college, did you take any literature or creative writing classes or continue to write?
Yeah. So no. The reason why I did business admin is because, again, I came from a very impoverished neighborhood. And so I felt like the only way to get out of this and from being disenfranchised from the rest of the world, or the rest of the city, at least at the time, was to study something that was practical. So if I got a business degree, it's easier for me to get into corporate America and to find a lucrative job. And so that was what my mind was set on. I think every 18-year-old who's going into college is not really sure what they really want to do. Mm-hmm. But when I went in, I kind of went in with the idea that I want to study something that at the time at least thought would make me $100,000 as soon as I got out,
Yeah, yeah.
So that was my mindset, but it really wasn't my passion. But I don't regret it at the same time. I am happy that I was able to get my bachelor's degree and now I'm able to study writing. I think it was important for me to at least have a foundation, or at least like something my dad always talks about is like having a contingency plan. This business degree is my contingency plan. I know that I can hopefully find another job, whenever I need to find a job, as well as doing my creative stuff on the side.
Yeah. I had a similar experience. I didn't grow up in poverty. I don't want to say that, but I came from like a blue collar background, very working class, kind of rural Missouri town. And so when I went to college, I really wanted to study English because I loved reading and writing. But there's like this voice, in the back of my head. It's like, what are you going to do with an English degree? How are you going to make any money with that? Right. So instead I did English education because I thought, okay, well, I can take the classes I want to take, and then I have a career path if I need, to get a job after school. Right. But like finding a way to still be able to take those literature classes and those creative writing classes. And then those experiences really stuck with me for years after that and made me keep coming back to writing. So what about you, having studied business admin in college? Did you continue to write creatively through that time? And after college, were you writing creatively?
Yes. So definitely wasn't doing it. Definitely wasn't taking it serious. It was, again, one of those, I was writing poetry a lot. Looking back now, I really wish that I would have applied myself more. And maybe taken like a English or creative writing elective in undergrad. But writing again didn't become really serious to me until I moved to Chicago in 2019. And that is when I started to fully dive into my writing.
What do you think motivated that change?
Yeah, so it was a time of stillness. It was a time of, I wasn't working. I had moved to Chicago with $1,000 in my savings account. And I had 3 job interviews lined up. And in my very arrogant 24-year-old self, I thought that, one of these jobs, I would land one of these jobs. I had 3 of them lined up. I would get one, at least. And it turned out I didn't get any of them. So I was applying for jobs. And this is around the time, it was harder to find work because jobs were more selective. And so I just remember being something will come up. I was doing a sublease for 2 months in the summertime. And then at the end of the summertime, when the 2-month lease was up, I was like, okay, what am I going to do? So I ended up moving in with a friend in a studio apartment and just being like, wow, this is just, I don't know if I can continue doing this. It was becoming a really dark space for me. And so I started writing this story called Journey of Siblings. It's supposed to be a 4-part novel, which I haven't touched since 2019. I remember writing a good 60 pages, single space too. And that was what really helped me to find a space outside of my space again, it was like writing became more of a journey, like a travel. Like I was literally traveling through like space and time through my writing. And so I was able to find like more solace and like writing during that time. And so once I started writing and like really taking it seriously and seeing how much it was saving me during that time, I felt like I was really indebted to writing. I felt like I had to like cultivate this skill, because if it wasn't for it, if I didn't have writing, I don't know how I would have survived during that time.
You also told me before the interview that you struggled for a long time with finding a community, and that you turned to writing as a way to deal with the emotional impact of that and also to hopefully meet people and feel like you belonged more. So was that around that time in Chicago that those feelings were happening? And how did writing help you to find a community?
Writing became my community. And I know that sounds so cliche, but I want to explain it a little bit more. But as a Black gay man, I was always too Black for the gay scene or the gay community. And I was always too gay to be really accepted within the Black community. And so I always found that that was like this anomaly who was like surviving and working and like trying to live in this like space where, or in these spaces where I feel like they are the most impactful or like they have the most drive in my life, or at least in my identity. And neither one of them were like fully wholeheartedly accepting of me. And so during that time again, when I was like really just like trying to find like myself in a sense, trying to figure out what I really wanted to do, that's how writing became like that community for me, because I was able to write about, I was writing characters that I felt really close to. I gave them stories that I felt like I was somewhat going through, and I was writing solutions for them and writing out like probable causes for like the reason why they're in this situation and how they can get themselves out. And in that way, I was like, it was also a way of processing my own like escape route out of like where I was at during the time. So yeah, so community was like my characters were like my community. Like they were the people who I would like talk to and like have this like in-depth conversation. I'm very much a introspective character writer. I don't know how, I mean, what I'm basically trying to say is that my characters have a lot of introspective thoughts that I like to put on the page. And that's just my way of rationalizing my life too. Like I'm always like introspectively thinking about all these different things that's happening in the world and where I fit in it. And I do the same thing with my characters. But in this particular story that I read today, it was heavily inspired by James Baldwin's style of writing. And my character is always in his mind, always trying to figure out what's going on with his father, what's going on with this, him being Black in this, in Paris, and like, what does his Blackness look like in this like foreign place, and like his Americanism, what is that? How does his Americanism come out and play into this like whole scenario when him being American wasn't something that he even really identified with?
Do you think that search for a community is one of the things that led you to pursuing an MFA?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, I felt like I had to find a way to get back to writing, in a sense of like, this thing really was like my savior during this time. And so I really, really, really needed to like, I really felt compelled to really like give it the space that it deserved. And then I also at the same time wanted to be around other writers who were also maybe feeling something similar, who also had like maybe a similar story. And at the time I didn't know any writers personally. So like I wanted to be around, like my dad always says, like you become like the things that surrounding you. So I wanted to be surrounded by a bunch of other people who were trying to do like-minded, doing the same things as me, so that like I can somehow like become more inspired, write more, I don't know, feel more part of like a space that is cultivating again this like this that I have to writing. I still feel like I have to writing to this day.
Well, you're now in your second year of the 2-year creative writing MFA program at Columbia College Chicago. It's a partially funded program, meaning there are teaching assistantships available on a competitive basis, but funding is not guaranteed. The program offers classes in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry, and it supports hybrid writing that combines elements of more than one genre. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of the MFA, I want to talk a bit about your transition after entering the program. As I mentioned, you were a business admin major in college, and you told me that most of your cohort had degrees in English or creative writing. What was it like for you coming into that environment?
Yeah, very much had imposter syndrome. I came in, when I was accepted, it was a moment of like almost disbelief because I had applied to another school prior to applying to Columbia, and I got denied. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get denied. I'm not really a writer. Like, I can't, this isn't for me. Like, this is something I took seriously all my life. Now, people who are doing this have probably done this most of their lives. And I just felt like that wasn't for me. And so I took a bit of time to readjust, figure out, if there's something I really want to do. And I found out that it was something I really wanted to do. So I studied a little bit more, got my grammar up to par, wrote some more stories, played around with form, tried to figure out what was like my style of writing. That's how I landed on short stories. But then going into the program, when I was around, like once I actually started in the program, I saw my cohort. I'm like, wow, all these people came from like these really good universities, and they all came from with a writing degree already or like an English degree. And I just felt like, my writing wouldn't stand up to par with the writing of my cohort.
Yeah, I mean, imposter syndrome is real. I don't think I've met a single writer who hasn't dealt with it at some point. And it can be especially tricky in an industry that has so much rejection involved in it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, I appreciate your willingness to discuss it, because I'm sure that listeners are going through it too. And I hope that they know that they're not alone. You told me that at first you used those feelings of inadequacy as a motivator, deciding to work harder and try to be better than everyone around you. But that had some of its own unintended consequences. So what effect did this resolution have on you and your writing?
Yeah. So it was a very toxic emotion at the time where I was around these writers, and they were around like good writers, really excellent writers. I really respect them. And that just fueled me to it put me in a space where I'm like, okay, I have to catch up. And not only do I have to catch up, I have to be better than, especially because writing is a very cutthroat industry. And so if your writing is up to par, you get rejected really fast. And at the end of the day, it almost feels like these people who you're in school with and who you're graduating and going to be graduating with you are also applying and trying to send their stuff out to the same places you're sending your stuff out to. And it's like, how do you disassociate yourself and your writing from the people who are also submitting to these places? And so again, coming into this program and me thinking to myself, like, these people are so great. What am I doing here? I really wanted to become better than them. Like I wanted to write in a way that was so much more compelling, or at least what I thought was so much more compelling than their writing. And it ended up having these really negative implications on me, because then I started feeling like I'm not writing things that I actually really want to write about. I'm not authentic to myself. I feel like my voice, which is something I really emphasized going into my program, that I want to be able to cultivate my own voice. But in trying to compete with everyone around me, this voice, I felt like my actual voice was becoming diluted. And this voice of like trying to appeal to the mass was like becoming more present. And it took me until I finished my first semester to realize that the writing that I was doing wasn't the writing I really felt like I should be doing and wanted to do. And so eventually I started taking myself out of that. I stopped looking at my cohort as competition. I stopped looking at them as like, we're all trying to do the same thing, and like it's only going to be so many of us who can make it. I started looking at them more like this is an opportunity to learn from each other, to learn from them. And so now like it started to mold into this space of like, how can I make your writing become the best it can be? And how in turn can you make my writing become the best that it can be? And then we exist in the same lane, or exist in our own relative lanes, but going in the same direction.
So during that time when you were having those feelings of having to like work extra hard to try to, beat out the other writers around you, you ended up going to Paris to study abroad. So tell us about how you ended up in Paris and about how those feelings and that attitude kind of caught up with you while you were there.
So my school, they have like every spring semester, like J-term semester, they do like a trip to Paris in creative writing. And you have to write a essay to get into it. And, everyone doesn't get accepted essentially. And so once I got accepted, I was really excited because I'm like, okay, I get to go to Paris. And essentially it was fully funded because I have a partial scholarship at Columbia. And that scholarship covered my trip to Paris. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to Paris basically for free. Like I want to take advantage of this. And then it wasn't until when I actually got to Paris and started being treated like an American is when I started having these very conflicting emotions about my identity and how that my identity translates. I put a lot of emphasis on my Blackness. Like a lot of my identity stems from me being Black. And so when I went to Paris and I had this, I was in these spaces amongst French men, they referred to me as not Black, but as like American. And me being American came with like a certain level of privilege that I was never privy to in America. And so I was like, I took advantage of it at the time. I was like, okay, I'm going to get these free drinks and I'm going to have all these have these men take me out and do all these things and stuff. But I started feeling really guilty about it afterwards, after coming the following weeks. And so as I started thinking about it, I started feeling guilty because I started thinking what I was taught a lot of my life was I need to revere whiteness. I have to become closer to whiteness, not in the sense of my family was like, oh, we need to be white or anything like that. But it was you need to go get an education. You need to put a lot of emphasis on meritocracy. And you need to always be reverent of authority figures, aka police officers who are normally white and things like that. And almost you have to have this subservience to whiteness. And then when I went to college and then I had these experiences with a bunch of with white people in my spaces, I started feeling that I can be equal to them or that I wanted to be equal to them. And then in a sense, I felt like I was shutting out a portion of my Blackness. And so I was reminded of that while I was in France, where these white Frenchmen were I don't know, it was a little weird for me. It was weird the way in which they were treating me, but it felt good at the same time. And so I had this huge identity crisis, which is how my short story, Paris from Underwater, came about. I was thinking of James Baldwin and how James Baldwin survived in Paris all those years. And he wrote these really great books, Giovanni's Room and things like that. And what was his experience in Paris compared to my experience in Paris? So yeah, it was a lot of, I had a lot of mixed emotions. And on top of that, it was a lot of, I got COVID while I was in Paris. It was someone tried to rob me in Paris. And so the program in Paris was really rigorous in a sense of we had to continue to write a short story, and then we had to write journals, and then we had classroom instruction, and after classroom instruction there was tours. So it was a really you really didn't have much time to do things that you really wanted to do, and if you did, you had to sacrifice sleeping to do it. And so I found myself being up 2-3 o'clock in the morning doing assignments because I wanted during the day to explore Paris. I'm in a new city, I want to explore it. And so those panic attacks came when I was feeling I was late on my assignments, or again, when I was almost getting robbed, and I caught COVID, and all these things that were happening at one time. And then at the same time having this identity crisis with myself, what does my Blackness mean? Who am I when my Blackness is stripped away from me and I'm just American? All of that culminated into these really intense crying sessions where I was just sitting at the desk in my hotel with wine bottles surrounding me and trash and just in this really depressive state. And it's just I couldn't even help myself. They just came out. The tears just came out. It wouldn't stop until I fell asleep. And so yeah, I had maybe 2 panic attacks while I was in Paris. talk to my best friend during the time, talk to my partner during the time, trying to like through those moments. But most of the time they were like busy because it would be nighttime and they're like at work during the day, like the 6 hour difference from here to Chicago. So it was like I felt really alone out there.
Yeah, I mean, my last year in the MFA, I had my own struggles with stress and anxiety, and I think exhaustion and burnout are real and fairly common in MFA programs and graduate school in general. So
Absolutely.
I think it's good that we're talking about it so that listeners can, start thinking about ways in which they can prioritize their mental health while they're in grad school. So having come out the other side of this, what have you learned from the experience, and what advice do you have for people listening who may be at risk of the same thing happening in the future?
Oh, my gosh. If you're anything like me, where you're like, where at the time I was like really I had a real big emphasis on like making sure that my grades were right. If it's any consolation, I don't think no agent, no publisher cares about your grades in your MFA program. And so like, I mean, obviously don't like slip and get a D or fail or anything like that. But at the end of the day, if you graduate with a 3.0 GPA as opposed to a 4.0 GPA, I don't think it's going to make a big difference. And so, what I learned from that experience is that I am going to do what I can. I'm not going to do anything more than that. And whatever that limit is for whoever's listening, recognize that, realize that this is their limit, and not try to stretch yourself any further than that. I would also say that a lot of programs are dropping from 3 years to 2 years, and my program is 2 years. And so we have, in conjunction with your classwork, you have to also work on your thesis. And so I would say if you're going into an MFA program for the first time, like this fall is going to be your first semester or something like that, or next fall, sorry, think about your thesis now, especially if in a 2 year program, because our thesis is 120 pages that we have to write, a publishable work. So it's not like, just send a draft and that's it. It has to be publishable. And it can be very taxing on your mental health when working on class assignments and things like that. I will also say advocate for yourself too. I found that when one of my professors like had us write 25 to 30 pages of an essay that was due at the end of the semester. And I'm like, that's unrealistic. Like we're working on thesis, we have 2 other classes we have to work on, other final assignments, 25 to 30 pages of something I'm never going to look at again isn't feasible for me or a lot of people in the class. And so we stood up to her. We told her like, maybe we should drop this down a little bit. And now it's 10 pages we have to turn in. So I'm like, advocating for yourself is, I can't tell you how far that goes, especially because professors respect graduate students usually more than they respect undergraduates. They see you almost as like a peer.
And I think too, when you're struggling with that stuff, that's where the community part can come in again too, right? You told us that search for a community was a big reason you wanted to pursue the MFA. So have you found the community you were looking for in your cohort?
I would say yes. Not in my full cohort, I would say. And I think that's reasonable. I think anyone in any program would say that I didn't vibe well with everyone in my cohort. But there were some that I felt like, okay, I really like your writing, and like I feel like I'm learning a lot from you. And then that's also like we also are supporting each other during this like really tumultuous time of like getting a MFA degree. So yes, for some I definitely do feel like I found some community. I think another portion of it was really hard for me to find community just in Chicago in general. If anyone who lives in Chicago, they would know that like Chicago is very segregated, from living on the north side to the south side to the west side, where like majority of the Black people who live in Chicago live on the south side, and very few speckles of us live on the north side, and I live on the north side. So it's really hard for me to find other Black queer friends. And now I can honestly say that I feel like I have a really good group of like Black queer like friends, that it doesn't just feel like a superficial kind of relationship. It feels so much more substantial than that. So to go back to your question, I definitely think I found some of my cohorts in my program to be really beneficial to like, as far as with like contributing to that community that I was searching for and writing. And then there's others who are just who I haven't, and that's fine too.
Yeah, and that's not like particularly uncommon, I don't think. It's
Yeah,
a pretty lucky situation if you come in and all the people who are in your program you get along great with. Usually, you find your pockets of people, right?
yeah,
People that
absolutely.
you gravitate towards. But one thing you did tell me was that this program has really great diversity in the cohort. So how important has that diversity been to you and your success in the program, you think?
Yeah, absolutely pivotal, I would say. Because for one, a lot of my cohort is not just like black and white, but we have like indigenous people also in our cohort as well. And I feel like from having just like this mix of like people from different parts of the country, different part from across the world, and like being able to share them sharing their experiences as it relates to like their writing and things like that. You learn so much more about the world, about other people's cultures, and like you find ways in which to like channel that creativity from those different people and like their different experiences. And obviously, you should never appropriate in your writing. That's very important. But I think it opens up your mind to like some things you can write about that could open up the minds of other people. So yeah, so I think even if it was an all black like cohort, that wouldn't to me be beneficial because I'm thinking like these are some of the stories that we'd be telling. Obviously, there'd be some nuance to them, or there'd be some differences, but like that doesn't necessarily represent a diverse space. It just represents an array of blackness. And I really wanted to see like blackness incorporated with indigeneity, incorporated with like Hispanic mixtures, even some incorporations with like whiteness. Just I really wanted that like melting pot of different people to like help influence like some of my writing, to help me generate some new writing, help me think about new things that I haven't thought about before, help me see the world in different ways. I think that's just like the beauty of academia to begin with.
And what about the faculty in your program? Have you felt like you've been able to make some strong connections with the faculty there?
I do, actually. There are quite a few people of color faculty members that we have that I gravitate towards a lot. One of my faculty members, or one of the professors I had in the fall semester, she actually gave me an opportunity to meet Jericho Brown and have dinner with him because she's really good friends with him. So like that was such a like, and the reason why she thought that she invited me to dinner with him was because she felt like it was important for me to see other Black gay men in the writing industry and to know that there's a space for you too. And so that was CM Burrows. She was just an amazing poetry professor. But I will never forget that, just thinking of me in that way and saying like, I want you to have this exposure so you can know and you can see the representation. It really does like, it solidifies the fact that there are professors who really do care about your growth and care about your success and are willing to like put out their own connection so that you can find success in whatever that avenue is for you.
I want to meet Jericho Brown.
Yeah, he's really cool. He's actually really, really, really funny. He's such a good time. But yeah, like he's so down to earth. Like you would think after winning a Pulitzer, like you have this mindset of like, okay, he's a Pulitzer Prize winning poet, and now he's going to have this kind of attitude where like he doesn't want to, associate with people who aren't Pulitzer writers. I don't know, that kind of thing. Like you have that mindset in your head, like, okay, he's going to have this like pompous attitude now. But he was so down to earth, and it was just like he was so willing to talk to me about like, what are you writing? What do you think is important? Like talk to me about your own writing and like where you see yourself going in the next 5 years, and like just really investing like that time and energy into me during the dinner, where like all I wanted to do was ask more about how he felt when he got the notification that he won the award.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a really cool experience for me.
You mentioned earlier how you have been working to like find your voice and how you've taken inspiration from James Baldwin. I'm sure experiences like this help with that. Have there been other experiences in the program, maybe even specific classes that you've taken that you feel like have helped you kind of hone your own voice?
I would say my very first workshop was the most important class I've taken. And I say that because my professor at the time, we wrote way more than a normal writing workshop usually goes. We were writing like 20 to 25 pages of new material, maybe every other week for the entirety of the workshop. And he acknowledged the fact that he knew that this was a lot for a student to be writing in a 15-week time span. But he said that he wanted us to write in that way. He gave us those writing assignments because he wanted us to prompt new ways of writing. And so from that class, I forget what the prompt was now, but it ended up spinning what my thesis was going to be about. And so that's how like having those different like prompts of like, it could be the most obscure thing. Like I don't know, what was the color of the moon when you were like 3? I don't know, something like that. And like you just start like it just like your imagination just spans from there. And so I would say that to this day, that class was probably the class that I felt I've gotten the most like inspiration for my writing. And it has fueled what my thesis is now.
There's like it's this interesting thing. I'm curious to hear if you've had this experience. Like when you're trying to like find your own voice, you take inspiration from other writers. Like there's other writers that you love that are doing things that you feel like, oh man, this is like kind of what I want to do. But at the same time, you also want to find your own unique voice. Like, has that been a struggle for you at all? Like trying to like connect those two things or find the balance in those things?
Yes. And I remember we had like these saloons before we actually started in the program. And like, I remember that being my question of like, how do you make sure you have like your voice is maintained when there's so many other voices around you? And I remember what the student said, she was like, your voice is innately yours. And so like, when you write, whatever comes out naturally is your voice. And it sounded like, at the time, it sounded as cliche. I'm thinking to myself, like, well, of course it's my voice. I wrote it. Like, that was my response to it. But now being in a program and seeing, like, it took some time for me to find this voice. And the only way I was able to find this voice is by reading and listen to the voices of the people around me and saying, like, oh, I kind of like that. I'm going to try that next. Let me see how I feel when I try writing in this form. Or I primarily write in first person, but, like, there was an assignment where we had to write in third person. And I'm like, okay, maybe just try it. Just trying out these different things doesn't necessarily mean like you are copying or like you're taking credit for someone else's way of writing or anything like that, but like just trying it out. I had an interview with Jesse Ball, and he wrote Senses, and he wrote it in a minimalistic way, the way he described it. And I thought it was a profound piece of writing. It was probably one of the 2 books I've read that made me cry at the end. And so I was like, I want to try this like minimalist way of writing. And that's how, and then Paris from Underwater is like that minimalistic style of like, there are no names, there are very little setting, being told. It's like, it's mostly just like the inner thoughts of the main character. And the plot is very rarely like moving from place to place without like his thoughts, traveling with it. So like, I was really trying to play with that. And I found that I really liked the minimalist like way of writing. So yeah, so I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean by that. Like that I'm hearing these voices. How do I maintain my own voice? But I really do think that once you get into the rhythm of like things that you like and you try some stuff out, you find out you don't like it, you do like it, whatever. Then you start implementing it. And then once you start implementing it, you do it in your own, you have your own way of doing it. So.
Well, this has been a really great conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, before we go, I want to ask you one more question, which is, what is one way in which the MFA experience has been different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
How it's been different from my expectation in a positive way is that I wasn't expecting for my cohort to be so open to me and my differences and like where I come from and like how I process things and things like that. I wasn't expecting, I was expecting everyone to just kind of be introverted and do their own thing and not like have that much association with each other, like not building that kind of community in a sense of like, I want to do my own thing. And then like, if you're here, whatever. that was what I thought might have happened, but I'm happy that that didn't happen. And then for a negative, I would say I did not expect curating a thesis to be so tumultuous. I didn't think it would be so hard and arduous, because it's like I haven't started working on my thesis with my thesis advisor yet, but just curating this like these stories have been such an emotional roller coaster for me. I've cried many times writing them because they're so personal to me. I've like thrown it away and given up on it for a time because I'm like, I don't want to keep going through these emotions, these feelings and things like that. And I didn't know how emotionally taxing it would be to really produce a body of work that is meaningful to who I am. So, yeah, I would say like that thesis, man, that thesis is a beast, really. And I think I think my program could have done better with preparing us for like what the thesis was going to be, what was going to be needed in the thesis, how like detail oriented you have to be when it comes to like creating this thesis and making it to be publishable and things like that. I didn't know it took so much time, but I mean, I guess it's just that's how much energy goes into writing a novel.
Well, it sounds like you've had a lot of growth over these last couple of years, even if it wasn't like, totally positive the whole time. But I really appreciate you being honest and open and giving listeners a sense of some of the, the difficulties that can come from being in an MFA program, being this pressure cooker. So anyway, I appreciate it. Thank you for the really nice conversation. Thanks for stopping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.